I also find this problem interesting because it tries to examine the effectiveness of sales approaches by making an experiment, if you will, on the use of both aggressive and passive techniques and recording whether or not sales were reached under each technique. So under the first basic idea here, we're just computing some basic probabilities. For example, the probability of making a sale. The probability of sale is just the number of sales that were made out of the total number of customers. The total number of sales were 782, and there were 1,160 customers. 782 divided by 1160 turns into a decimal, no problem in my calculator, but it wants a fraction. So I'm going to use number 1 under the math option, hit the math button, and number 1 will turn this thing into a fraction and simplify the fraction for me if possible. So turn it into a fraction, I get 391 out of 580 as a simplified fraction. As a decimal, just for comparison, that's 0.6741 to 4 decimal places. Now we'll make some conditional probabilities. What's the probability of getting a sale given that the aggressive approach was used? So now this condition restricts the sample, restricts how many we're looking at. We're only looking at the aggressive approach. And so that total of aggressive approach was 580 customers. The number of those that were a sale under the aggressive approach were 290. 290 divided by 580 is 0.5. I hope you don't need a calculator to turn that into a fraction. 1 out of 2. So 50% of aggressive approaches result in a sale. Now let's look at the number of sales we get given that we're having a passive approach. So the passive approach is this row. 580 customers also received the passive approach, and the number of sales in the passive approach were 492, much more than the number of sales in the aggressive approach. So 492 divided by 580 is a decimal of 0.8483, and I turn that guy into a fraction. With the math number 1, press enter. 123 out of 145. Those are basic probabilities. Probability of a sale in general, probability of a sale given that we use the aggressive approach, probability of a sale given that we use the passive approach. So now that we know these probabilities, we're asked if they are independent. Does the method of sale affect the probability of sale? Does the approach affect the probability of a sale? Sales happen 67% of the time on their own, regardless of approach. %50 of sales happen, or the probability of a sale under the aggressive approach is 50%. But if we use the passive approach, the probability of sale jumps up to almost 85%. So we can say without a doubt that these two events, the approach, affects the probability of sale, because the probability of sale 0.67 changes under different conditions or under different approaches. So yes, or no, they're not independent. Yes, they are dependent. That's because the probability of sale is different than the probability of sale given that a passive approach was used. Part C looks at the probability of aggressive and sale and the probability of passive and sale. No condition, so no restriction on the denominator, we're looking at all the customers involved, all 1,160 in both cases. The number that were aggressive and had a sale, that's the customers in the aggressive approach that bought something. So here we're looking at all 1160. Aggressive with a sale was 290. Aggressive and sale. 290 divided by 1160 is 0.25, or 1 in 4 customers, whether they bought something or not. All customers there. Probability of passive and sale are these guys. 492 people meet that requirement. They received the passive approach and they bought something. 492 out of 1160 is 0.4241, or turn it into a fraction as 123 out of 290. Next, we're asked to compute the probability of not making a sale. So the probability of not making a sale is the number of non-sales out of the total number of customers. There were 378 under either approach that did not buy anything. 378 out of 1,160 customers is 0.3259, or as a fraction, 189 out of 580. And then a conditional probability again. What's the probability of not making a sale given that the aggressive approach was used? So this aggressive approach use restricts the total we're looking at. We're only interested in those that received the aggressive approach. There were 580 of those. And 290 non-sales that were used, that had the aggressive approach. 290 out of 580, 0.5, also known as 1/2. So, is the probability of making not a sale, of not making a sale, independent of the approach that we use? Almost 33% of customers don't buy anything regardless of approach, but half of them don't buy anything if the aggressive approach is used. So because the probability of not making a sale is different than the probability of not making a sale given that we use the aggressive approach, that means that the aggressive approach affected the probability of not making a sale, not a sale. Therefore, they are not independent, they are dependent. One affects the other. Finally, we can talk about the probability of having an aggressive approach or making a sale. This is the probability of an aggressive approach or the probability of making a sale. Notice that these guys are not mutually exclusive. That is because the probability of having an aggressive approach and making a sale is not 0. Those two things can occur at the same time. In fact, we found before that these things occur at a rate of 1 in 4. So to use the rule for OR, the general addition rule, the probability of the first event plus the second event minus the probability that they both happen. Subtract that overlap. we said the probability of both of them is 1 out of 4. And I have to go back and look at the table for the probability of aggressive and the probability of a sale. The probability of aggressive, no restriction, remember, just what's the probability that we have aggressive out of the total is 580 out of 1160. Plus the probability of making a sale. So we did that earlier. I'll just go back to the table to get it from the horse's mouth, if you will. There are 782 sales out of 1160 customers. And subtract the 1 in 4, the 290 aggressive sales. I can type all this in the calculator, 580 divided by 1160 plus 780 divided by 1160 minus 1 out of 4, or minus 290 out of 1160 is 0.92. to 4. Don't change that number, just turn it right into a fraction, 107 out of 116. So a 92% chance an individual effect selected at random will have the aggressive approach or make a purchase. Maybe both, maybe only one, but that's the probability of randomly selecting an individual in either category.